You've included a couple of studies in the book about glucose flattening diets as the most effective way to reduce or to reverse, sorry, type 2 diabetes and prevent type 2 diabetes. I wonder if we could speak about that slightly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for a long time, and I'm going to speak about American studies because those are
Yeah,
the
yeah.
ones that have been the biggest. So, for a long time, the American Diabetes Association did not recommend essentially a low glucose spiking diet or low carb
Mm,
diet, if you will, to prevent diabetes. We used to think it was just a matter of reducing calories or focusing on fat reduction. And while those can also work, so for example, a lot of really cool studies have been shown on the benefits of fasting for reversing type 2 diabetes. They also work, but one of the most effective ways to put your diabetes in remission is just to stop what's causing it in the first place, which is this excess insulin that gets triggered after each glucose spike. So now the American Diabetes Association does recommend a low glucose spike diet because, just faced with the mounting evidence that shows that this is beneficial, it's become very clear that it's one of the best ways to do it. And if you focus on reducing your glucose spikes, you can put your diabetes in remission without having excessive hunger, without
mm.
suffering from cravings. While a low fat or low calorie diet also work, they can be much harder to deal with because you're hungry all the time. But when
Mm.
you flatten your glucose curves, your cravings start dissipating. So things just are much easier. But what's your experience, Rupi, with this?
Well, I was going to say this is probably a lovely way of thinking about it because it means that you're agnostic about the type of diet one might want. And I always refer back to this study, the A to Z study by Gardner at Stanford University, where they demonstrated that regardless of the diet that you chose, whether it was low calorie, low carb, paleo, everyone could lose weight. The kicker was your ability to maintain said diet. And so if you choose, one that has an omnivorous diet or a vegan diet or a low carb diet, I think the best way to look at this is using glucose as a lens. So looking at actually what the impact is on your glucose, not at the expense of everything else. And I think one of the first things you say in your book is glucose isn't everything. And I think that's a really good primer for a lot of people because it can become a bit obsessive. And we'll talk about that a bit later. But looking at any diet or any way of eating that you want, through the lens of glucose and its impact on insulin, I think is a really good way of describing how people can maintain a diet like that and actually lead to the benefits, of which there are many.
Absolutely. And the hacks I share, they can be applied to anybody's dietary preferences. So whether you're
Yeah.
vegan or you're keto or you're whatever, the hacks like eating your food in the right order, having a savory breakfast, putting clothes on your carbs, these apply to everyone. What I talk about is not, another type of diet. These are just
Mm.
fundamental principles regarding how to eat to keep your body in an optimal space. So that's really important to me to point out. This applies to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about some of these hacks because that's,
Yeah.
that's what people are listening for. So let's talk about these hacks that are used to flatten your glucose. You mentioned a couple of them there. The order of your food. I want to start off there because I think this is an easy one to start off with, and the explanation behind it I think is brilliant. Like the potential mechanisms as to why this might work.
Sure. So let's say you have your next meal in front of you, and your meal has different components. Maybe it has some fish, some rice, some broccoli, and then a dessert. If you eat the elements of that meal in a specific order, you can reduce the glucose spike of the meal by up to 75%. So,
75.
yeah, and the insulin spike by up to 40%. So you can eat the exact same meal, but if you eat the food in your meal in the right order, my gosh, a lot of things get better. And so the right
Mm.
order is vegetables first. So in our case, the broccoli, proteins and fats second. So the fish and whatever fat you also have on your plate. Then starches. So the rice. Then sugars. So the dessert, which that one's an obvious one.
Yeah, of course. And the reason why?
The reason why is because the fiber in the vegetables has this magical superpower. If you eat your vegetables first, The fiber lands in your stomach first, then it arrives in your small intestine, and there it deploys its superpowers. The fiber essentially turns into this viscous mesh that coats the inside of your intestinal walls. And this viscous mesh is now protecting you from any glucose coming down afterwards and preventing your body from absorbing too much of that glucose too quickly into your bloodstream. So it's protecting you from this rapid rise in glucose in your blood. So it's preventing the glucose spike. That's the first reason the order is really effective. The second reason has to do with the protein and the fat. So there's this mechanism called gastric emptying, which is the process of your food moving from your stomach to your intestine. And protein and fat, when they're in your stomach, they slow down gastric emptying. So if you eat the proteins and fats first before the carbs, any carbs arriving afterwards will just make it to your small intestine at a slower pace. And then once they're there, the fibrous mesh is even preventing too much glucose from getting through anyway. So you have these two very powerful mechanisms.
Talking about the order of food, let's talk about breakfast. So there is that saying, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And you say that is true, but not for the reasons that we have been taught historically. So tell us about glucose. Tell us about glucose and breakfast and why this is so important.
Totally. So this is coming from someone, I will repeat it, who used to have a Nutella crepe or two every morning when I was a kid until, I was 15 years old or something. And I would then go to school. And then by 10:30, I was famished. Like my stomach would hurt from the hunger I felt. And I just thought that was normal. I just thought this is what normal feels like. It's normal to have this pain all morning and to be this starving. It turns out that actually your breakfast and the glucose spike it creates or does not create in your body first thing in the morning has a humongous impact on your hunger levels and your cravings for the rest of the day. So in the scientific studies, they gave people two different breakfasts. Both had the exact same number of calories. So it's not about calories. One created a big glucose spike. The other one did not. In the group that had a big glucose spike for breakfast, they became hungry again after 2 hours, just like it would happen to me. In the group that did not have a glucose spike, they were hungry at like 2 p.m., 3 p.m. They didn't even have this crazy craving for food until mid-afternoon. Yeah. And so actually, the scientists discovered that the shape of your breakfast glucose spike really impacts how you're going to feel, how hungry you're going to get because of its effect on your insulin levels, on the craving center in your brain, and on your hunger hormones. So big hack, number one hack, eat a savory breakfast, because that's the simplest way to get yourself somewhere where your breakfast will not create a glucose spike. So center your breakfast around protein, fat, fiber. Then you can add a bit of starch and sugar for taste. But in the sugar realm, only have whole fruit if you want something sweet in the morning. Cut out cereal, muesli, oats, fruit juices, like all that stuff. But you can have those as dessert after your lunch or your dinner if you really want to. So I'm not about like cutting things out really, just I'm about rearranging and reorganizing when and how you eat your food. So you still get the same pleasure, but you're not harming your body in the process.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that philosophy. Actually, it's not about restricting or saying you can't have something or other. It's just about the order or the order as being one of the hacks. And actually, from my own clinical practice of discussing this with patients, particularly those who will have, certain cereal brands in the morning, they're hungry by 11 and they're asking me for snack options and that kind of stuff. I'm like, well, we need to really look at the glucose content of your meal at the start of the day, because that will send you on a roller coaster that will dictate your hunger levels, your fatigue levels, what you're craving in the afternoon in terms of a coffee for more energy and that kind of stuff. So it's a really important hack. And I'm a big fan of having a savory breakfast. In fact, I have my leftovers
Me
from dinner,
too.
and they're like, but you have that as well. Okay,
Oh my
great,
God,
great.
it's
We're
my
on the
favorite.
same team.
I have like fish for breakfast now, or
Yeah.
broccoli, like anything. It's really it's really nice. And
Yeah.
I want to say something about these cravings and how your patients are then asking you, how do I like suppress these cravings, or how do I cater to them? And
Mm,
actually, what's really happening is that these cravings are just a symptom of the dysregulated glucose levels. And so it's important to zoom out, and as you do really well, to ask, why are they there in the first place? It's like if you have a bunch of pimples on your face, sure, you can buy makeup and take medication to get the pimples to go away, or do a bunch of stuff to cover it up or try to placate the situation. But actually, if you zoom out, it's like, this is just a symptom of this underlying thing happening in my body, very often just too many glucose spikes. And all these symptoms, the cravings, the acne, the poor energy, the poor sleep, I like to think of them as your body trying to speak to you.
mm.
That's your body trying to be like, hey, Rupi, like, there's some stuff going on in here. Can you please like
Yeah.
try to get these glucose spikes under control? And your body tries to speak to you. But often we don't know how to listen, and we suppress the symptoms, or we medicate them, or we feel guilty about them, when actually we just need to listen.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think, having more data on what's going on inside combined with intentional listening, i.e., being more intuitive about what your body's saying to you, I think is a really good way of ensuring that we start and maintain habits that we can that will put us in good stead.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, that's why I'm a really big fan of really listening to what's going on in your body, and actually having monitors like that, because it can yeah, give you a lot of insight into that. I did have a question about this particular chapter. What is it brigadeiro?
Yeah.
Brigadeiro? What is that brigadeiro?
Oh my God, it's the most delicious thing in the whole world. So I think it's a chapter in which I explain all the delicious chocolatey stuff I like to eat.
Yeah.
And so brigadeiro, my step grandmother is Brazilian,
Uh-huh.
and it's a Brazilian dessert. And so the way it's made, so you get condensed milk
Uh-huh.
and butter, and you heat it up in a pan, and
Right.
then you add a bunch of powdered chocolate that also has sugar in it. So you
Okay.
make this sort of caramel chocolate thing, and then you let it cool down, and you can either eat it with a spoon, or you can turn it into little balls and put chocolate sprinkles around them, or powdered sugar.
Wow. Wow.
It is so good, Rupi. It's so good. And in the book, I explained that, of course, I eat this stuff because it's delicious,
Yeah.
but I don't eat it on an empty stomach. I'll
Mm,
have it for dessert after a meal, maybe after some vinegar too. And then I'll go for a walk, and use my muscles so I can still enjoy this
mm.
delicious, decadent dessert, but with fewer consequences on my body. So I don't feel guilty about it. I'm like, it's cool. I'm using all my hacks so that I
Yeah.
can eat this and help my body process it as well. But you
Yeah.
have to try this. I
I
can't
know.
believe you.
I
I'll
definitely
send you
will
the
try
recipe.
that. You have to send me the recipe for sure. I mean, like, a lot of people are in disbelief when I tell them about what the kind of things that I like to eat. Obviously, in moderation, I don't have it every single day or whatever. But I think indulgence is a really important part of living. And
Yeah.
food is such an important pleasure. And you just described to me right there with this being a recipe from your family lineage. It's a Brazilian. There's this history there, so you want to be able to enjoy food with that knowledge, and minimize the impact on your physiology too. So yeah, I think it's a really
Yes.
important part.
And also, when you get your glucose levels steady, what happens is that this break takes place. The things that you used to crave just because your glucose levels was deregulated,
Mm,
like really crappy tasting cookies at the corner store, or just anything sweet you'd find at the airport, those go away. So now when you eat something sweet, it's because you really love it and it's really good. It's no longer out of this just very intense feeling of, oh my God, I need sugar right now. So as a result, your relationship to, delicious brigadeiro or chocolate cake or chocolate ice cream or all the chocolate things I like changes. You're much more in an enjoyment mode because you're no longer controlled by them. You're being intentional and happy about it, and it brings you joy and no more guilt and no more pain. So it's such a beautiful thing to experience, to go to that side of the mirror.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. There's a whole bunch of desserts now that I'm thinking that my mum makes with a
Like
ton of
what?
sugar in. So, well, there's rasmalai, which is one of my favorites, sort of like a milky dessert with like a sponge, and it's got cardamom and a
Nice.
ton of sugar. And there's also gulab jam, which is like a small donut that's deep fried and then covered in syrup. It's a
Wow.
terrible dessert when you think about it from a glucose pod. I can't believe we're talking about this on the glucose pod, but it's very very sugary, and you definitely need to put into action some of your hacks. You mentioned vinegar. I want to talk to you about this one because this is new to me. Tell us about why vinegar before a sugary dessert or a meal can flatten glucose levels, and that's been shown in studies as well.
It's because vinegar contains this magical molecule called acetic acid. And acetic acid communicates with your muscles, and it goes to your muscles and it tells them, hey, Rupees muscles, you need to soak up way more glucose than usual. You're really hungry for glucose. And the acetic acid essentially tells your muscles to do just that. If they feel any glucose coming into the bloodstream, they now are going to soak it up and store it as glycogen at a much higher rate than they normally would. So, what happens is that you eat your sugary thing or you eat that meal. But if you have a tablespoon of vinegar in a tall glass of water before that meal, or you can even just add vinegar to the meal, for example, you have a much smaller glucose spike, but it's reduced by up to 30% without changing anything that you're eating. Just
Wow.
by adding something to the situation, you reduce the spike. So, flattening your glucose levels is not about cutting things out or reducing what you eat. More often than not, it's about adding things to your diet,
Yeah, yeah,
which makes
yeah.
it fun. But it's really incredible the power of vinegar. And there are many clinical trials, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials on
Mm,
vinegar that show the impact on remission of type 2 diabetes, on polycystic ovarian syndrome symptoms. And just as we were saying about the starting with vegetables being something, traditional in Iran and in other countries, apple cider vinegar is something that everybody drinks every day, and grandmothers make it. It's like it's a very traditional thing to make. So how amazing that now we know that actually one of the ways it's helpful to us is in reducing the glucose spikes. It fascinates me. It's so cool.
yeah, no, that is really cool. And like I'm just trying to think of other cuisines that might have that sort of vinegary element at the start of the meal. And what I've traditionally thought it was because of is because it enhances sort of your digestive enzymes and it
It
starts that whole
does.
process. Which is yeah, which kind of makes sense, like you're going to break down the molecules, you're going to activate your muscles, take on the glucose and convert it into glycogen, and so that yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm just trying to think of like other examples of diets that might do this. And have you heard of Roshuku, the Japanese sort of order? I believe they have ferments at the start of the meal. Would that be the same thing, or is that slightly different?
That's different. So there's no acetic acid specifically in fermented foods, although
Mm,
vinegar is a fermented food. But eating fermented foods are really good for lots of other reasons, notably your
mm,
microbiome.
mm.
Tim Spector talks about this a lot. The lead scientist on this team at King's College, which is where I studied, that
Yeah.
study glucose levels, and they have a bunch of cool papers on this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, he's been on the pod a couple of months ago, and he's actually got me as a guinea pig for Zoe at the moment. I'm actually wearing
Nice. You
the
are a
CGM
glucose
arm.
monitor.
I'm doing another one at the moment as well. It's the Dexcom, just to
Yeah.
see what the difference is, and I'm calibrating it as well to make sure that it's accurate. And I think what I'm seeing is like the great trends, particularly for the next thing I was going to ask you about, which is postprandial exercise. So after eating, if I go for a walk, my glucose level is steady regardless of whatever I've eaten. It's pretty amazing to see that actually. And if I mean I'm using a standing desk at the moment, but if I eat something in the afternoon that has like some rice, or I haven't done any of your order hacks, I certainly haven't had any vinegar or anything like that, I can see that rise. I see that bump in the middle of the day. Tell us about the postprandial exercise. I think this is super interesting. It's something that everyone could do.
Well, your muscles, every time they contract, they need energy to do it. And the first place they look for this energy is in glucose in your bloodstream. And so this is information that can really help us understand why it's useful, because after you eat a meal, you have two options. You either sit in your couch, the glucose from the meal makes it through your digestive system, then into your bloodstream, and big glucose spike. Then your body, with the help of insulin, brings that glucose back down. Or if after you eat, within an hour after the end of your meal, if you start using your muscles, so you can go for a walk, you can dance to your favorite song, you can do the dishes, you can fold your laundry, you can play with your kids, you can go do a really intense workout at the gym, whatever, your muscles, as they contract, will be soaking in the glucose from your bloodstream to be used for energy. And as a result, the spike is just naturally smaller.
Mm.
And what's really cool is that when you're exercising, your muscles do not need insulin to uptake glucose. So moving your body, using your muscles after eating, reduces the glucose and the insulin spike.
Mhm.
Super powerful, especially powerful if you're somebody who suffers from being sleepy after your meals, which is often a side effect of the glucose crashing back down. It's really helped me completely get rid of that. So I'm no longer sleepy after my meals, because I get up and I move for 10 minutes and then I feel great and energized, and I don't have that slump, and I don't have the cravings a couple
Yeah.
hours after eating. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
No,
another one
that's
of the hacks in Glucose Revolution. And it's easy stuff, and it really is life changing.
yeah, no, that's almost like the holy grail, isn't it? It's stable glucose with stable insulin levels as well. That's like the ultimate hack that we all need to sort of try and get into the habit of doing, right? Because the
Yeah,
insulin,
because one of the ways to keep your glucose levels down or steady is to inject a bunch of insulin,
mm,
because the more insulin there is, the more your glucose will be put away into the storage units in your body. But the issue is, you know, doing that doesn't actually solve the problem. And over time, all this insulin leads to insulin resistance, which is the precursor to type 2 diabetes. So it's really important to think about hacks that lower your glucose levels while also lowering your insulin. And vinegar does this, eating your food in the right order does this, moving after you eat does this, and all the other hacks in my book also do this.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note that this isn't just for people who are at risk of type 2 diabetes or might have a metabolic inflexibility issue like PCOS, or, this is for everyone, including type 1 diabetics, actually, obviously with the advice of a health professional and a nutritionist if you have one, because you need to be monitoring your insulin requirements. But reducing one's insulin requirements is a massive win. And I don't think we fully appreciate the ability to do this with some simple lifestyle hacks that you've just described here on the pod, and you also do in the book as well.
Absolutely. And, for a long time, we thought that only people who had diabetes, so type 1 or type 2, had to worry about their glucose levels. But now we know, Rupi, that 90% of people without diabetes experience glucose spikes every day without knowing it, but while being very familiar with the consequences, the
Mm.
cravings and the fatigue and the needing to eat every 90 minutes, the poor sleep, the hormonal issues, the weight gain, the acne, the everything. So this is really a revolution in our understanding of health and of the importance of glucose. And that's who the book is for. The book is for anybody who doesn't wake up in the morning feeling amazing. It's for everybody, because keeping your glucose levels steady helps you in so many ways, physical and mental,
Mm.
everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's been some criticism of CGM for non-diabetics in the past over the last couple of years, some doctors on Twitter. And my response to that is, even though when I work in the NHS, we don't have access to these monitors for those who do not have type 2 diabetes, and it is kind of hard to get them even for those people as well. It's what you just described there. It's the understanding of why you're having these reactive hypoglycemic episodes that lead to a roller coaster of your emotions and how you're feeling in terms of your energy levels. that can also have impacts on you craving. And then in the context of an obesogenic environment, you're then grabbing whatever is in front of you, which unfortunately in our environment is a lot of sugary snacks, a lot of high salt
Absolutely.
snacks, a lot of things that are going to rapidly change your glucose levels, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And for those who don't have access to or can't afford glucose monitors because they're still quite expensive, or in the US need a prescription to get them, it's not like you can just buy them anywhere. The glucose hacks I share, you don't need a glucose monitor to use them. In fact, I would say maybe 98% of the people who are following my Glucose Goddess Instagram account, they don't have a glucose monitor. They're just using the hacks and starting to feel better very quickly, physically and mentally, without needing to monitor themselves. But I do think that wearing a glucose monitor is very interesting, very cool, and can help you reconnect with your body in a way. How has your experience been?
My experience has been really positive. I
Mm.
think I'm the kind of person that loves analytics, and I'm also the kind of person that won't get too anxious about it either. And I think I've described my experience to a few other people, including people who would not like and would not benefit from, say, like an Aura ring or some other sleep device, because they'd get pretty anxious in the mornings about how they haven't
Mm-hmm.
slept properly, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think it would be appropriate for those types of people, because it's almost a bit too much information and it can spiral into an unhealthy obsession with eating to maintain your glucose level. So I think for certain people, it would be brilliant. I actually think a CGM would be useful in short bouts, like for 7 days, to see what your response is like. And then maybe in the same way you would do a blood test every 6 or 12 months, you see what your metabolic flexibility is like on the basis of some of your lifestyle hacks. So when it comes to like encouraging people to adopt a lifestyle that's super healthy, I think it could be a really good thing to trial.
Absolutely. But definitely, if you're somebody who tends to, get quite disordered when it comes to tracking yourself. So whether it's weight, whether it's steps, like if you're that kind of person where this is triggering to you, don't use a glucose monitor, because it's
Mm.
giving you constant feedback every 30 seconds on what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
And yes, for some people, it can be very overwhelming. I think as long as there's enough education around it, it's easy to understand what's happening. But what I see often is that people will try one and then they get very hung up on the exact numbers. They're like, oh, I was
Mm.
at 87. Now I'm at 84. Am I okay? Is this bad? Is this reactive hypoglycemia? So
Yeah.
if you're going to wear a glucose monitor, read my book so you can get the context and not get too freaked out about small things and understand what actually matters. That's
Yeah.
my recommendation, because I get a lot of messages from stressed out people and it breaks my heart because they're
Really. Yeah.
fine. Yeah, because
Yeah. Yeah.
there's very little education so far. People don't really know how to interpret the data. So really, and if you don't want to buy my book, that's fine. Just look on my Instagram and try to get a bit of context before you use it, just for your own sake, because I don't want you to be stressed out when you're probably totally fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I have the exact same sort of relationship with some of my followers as well, and people who listen via the pod and the newsletter and all the rest of it, because sometimes it can be really easy to get hung up on exactly every element of your lifestyle to try and optimize it.
Mhm.
And if you're not doing that, am I bringing myself to harm? If I have a bit of sunflower oil, is this inflammatory? Is this going to lead me to have cancer? All these different things that you can understand, to certain people would spiral into an unhealthy obsession. So I think that's really important. But I think you've done a really good job. Like I said right at the start of this pod, the fact that you've communicated the science really responsibly is super clear. And right at the start, you say, look, glucose isn't everything, because if you just eat for your glucose monitor, you'll just eat bacon all day long. That's not going to do anything to your glucose levels, but it's not going to be healthy. So yeah, I appreciate that. And I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you, Rupi. It's very important to me to, be as nuanced as I possibly can to explain that there's many other things in your life. Yes, glucose and keeping your glucose level steady will help you feel better and it's going to heal a lot of stuff. But, sleep is important, stress is important, not eating unhealthy fat is important, having human connections is important, medical care is important. So many things also exist. And I don't want people to become too focused on just glucose, especially while wearing a glucose monitor, because as you mentioned, you can just eat bacon all day and have flat glucose levels, but that's not the answer. And in the hacks that I share, I'm very cautious about that. And the hacks will help you feel better, will help you flatten your glucose curves while avoiding those pitfalls. And that's very, very important.
What are the kinds of foods that you feel people are consuming that are leading to those spikes and crashes unbeknownst to them? So one of them we've already mentioned was oats and oat milk, I think, which is a great sort of starting point given how popular it is. What are some of the other culprits that perhaps people don't really recognize at this point?
Fruit smoothies.
Oh yeah.
So all those innocent smoothies you find at the train station, and it says healthy on it and no added sugars, but actually, if you know how to decipher it all, you realize that's just sugar water. Even if it's orange and it looks innocent, it's not. So those, any sort of breakfast foods or breakfast bars, I think those are not great, especially if you have them first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
Those cereal bars with dates, etc., and rice syrup, etc. If you have that for breakfast, it's going to create a big spike. I think, my pet peeve are the food items that people think are healthy, and marketing is very convincing, but actually are really bad for you and your glucose levels. For example, if you look at a chocolate muffin, everybody knows that has sugar in it, that's a dessert. But if you look at a fruit smoothie or an oat milk something or an acai bowl or a granola bar, you might not know that actually it's causing a big spike in your system. And everybody is trying to make healthy choices. And most people who drink, for example, fruit juices or fruit smoothies, they are doing that because they truly believe that that is good for them. And the marketing is very believable.
Yeah.
So that's really what I'm trying to fix here. The issue of food products pretending to be healthy, but actually being really unhealthy. If you look at a chocolate, for example, there's no trick going on there. There's no label on the chocolate bar that says, oh, gluten-free, no added sugar, good for your heart. It's chocolate.
Yeah.
It's a chocolate bar.
Yeah.
People know that it's sweet. Yeah. The ones that I hate are the ones with the misleading marketing. And we need to teach people from the ground up, but we also need more regulation in the food industry so that ultra-processed food products cannot put on the label stuff that seemingly makes them look healthy.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's so easy to be duped, even if you are educated around food and you feel like you're reasonably educated enough to recognize what is good and bad, you can still get tripped up. Yeah. One of the pet peeves I have, and I saw this actually at the airport, are these sort of like immunity shots, right? So, ginger and turmeric and all the rest of it, it's got those sort of like highlighted on the label. In reality, those only constitute less than 20%. And what's the majority of it is apple juice. It's just apple juice every time. And I always read it and I'm like, this is just pure sugar. Yeah. And like, fair enough, it's a tiny shot. So the impact of that is going to be less than if it was a full sort of 300 ml.
For sure, but it's not about that. It's about the tricking of the consumer.
It's the tricking, exactly.
It's the tricking of the consumer. You know, another one that I hate are cookies or biscuits that say vegan and gluten-free.
Yeah.
And of course, if you've heard that, if you're trying to be health conscious, you see these labels like, oh, it's vegan and gluten-free, that must be good. But actually, something vegan and gluten-free can be way worse for your body than something with eggs and gluten. So what I tell people is, as soon as you see that kind of health halo on a food packaging, just consider it to be dessert.
Red flag.
Red flag. It's like, this is dessert. Okay, this is for pleasure, dopamine release in your brain. It's not going to be healthy for your body.
Actually, I think a good heuristic actually is to, whenever you see that sort of lovely dark green packaging with something that says healthy or like full of fiber or all these different flags, that's a red flag straight away. And then you should be a lot more sort of primed to, decipher exactly what is in this bar or this product or whatever. And I think protein bars are probably some of the biggest culprits. I've had a lot of people and patients in the past who had gut issues, and, you sort of dig into what they're eating. And it's very, very restricted because, it might just be like brown rice or broccoli or whatever, because they're the type of people that eat a lot of these protein bars. But when you look at the ingredients of what's in these protein bars, it's a lot of emulsifiers, thickeners, things that are generally pretty bad for your gut. as well as all the refined sugars and stuff that are going to send your glucose up and down.
And another one I would say is the no added sugar label. This does not mean there's no sugar in it. This just means that the sugar was not added during the creation of the food product. It just means it was there since the beginning. So for example, an orange juice, which has as much sugar in a can as a can of Coke, can absolutely have the label no added sugar.
Yeah.
Because the sugar is from the original orange ingredient. You see what I mean? So that's one I hate, because no added sugar does not mean no sugar.
Yeah.
It can mean a whole lot of sugar.
Totally. Cool. We're basically talking about everything from the sort of assumption that keeping glucose levels flat is optimal. But there is some debate about this, isn't there? And I'm sure you're aware of some of the skeptics around whether we should even be measuring glucose and actually, our oscillations in our glucose on a day-to-day basis responsible for the sort of predisposition to type 2 diabetes and all the other complications that can occur when your average glucose level is raised over time. Why don't we discuss some of those sort of anti-glucose
I'm so happy we're having this
arguments?
conversation. I love it. I think it's super
I think it's really healthy
Yeah.
to have sort of a pragmatic discussion
Absolutely.
without finger pointing,
Yeah.
to sort of like question. I mean, you're a scientist. You know that skepticism is important. Cynicism is something else. I always have this thing where it's like you can definitely lean into the skeptics because they're there to sort of like ratify the truth. Cynics, despite the wealth of evidence to the contrary, will always be cynical. And I think there's a big difference.
What I like to say is don't turn cynicism into inaction. Right? Like it's great to question, but don't question and become cynical to a point where you don't even try new things.
Yeah.
Okay, so great debate, super important. So many things to cover here. I think maybe the first one we should look at is, should everybody be tracking their glucose levels if you want?
Yeah, that's definitely a good place to start.
So when I started my work 5 years ago, I was really pushing the glucose monitor thing. I was like, everybody should get one. It's amazing. It changed my life. And it's the reason I got interested in this in the first place. And then I realized I don't think that's the right line, because wearing a glucose monitor can be very confusing. The data is not simple to interpret. It's really not simple to interpret. Listen, even sometimes I'm like, what the heck is going on with this data? All those fake lows and the spikes, and I get messages from people every day like, my glucose is 86, now it's 94, do I have diabetes? People don't know how to interpret this medical data.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a good idea for everybody to slap on a glucose monitor, because it can lead to more stress and confusion than anything else. And another thing that I realized is that most people can get all the benefits from steady glucose levels without wearing a glucose monitor. If you use my hacks and you just track, like the participants in my study who were not wearing CGMs, if you just track cravings, energy, hunger, sleep, and mood, you're golden. You got it all.
Yeah.
And you'll feel the difference in your body anyway very quickly when you apply the hacks. So yeah, my view on this has changed very significantly over the past few years. Well, how are you feeling?
I feel very similar to that. I think the benefits of CGMs are certainly there for people who respond well to, what gets measured, gets managed. But I think in the same way calorie counting can tip people over into anxiety, CGMs offer the same potential downfall as well. I personally find wearing a CGM every quarter or every 6 months, for 10 days or so, just to sort of like see how I'm responding to food, I find that incredibly interesting. And I'm sort of an education level, being a medic and nutritional medicine master's student, where I can interpret some of that. Some of the stuff I can't. Some of the stuff I'm like, I don't really understand what's going on here. And I think the other thing that is really important to ensure people are aware of is it's not always what's on your plate that can impact your glucose levels.
Stress,
hydration,
movement, time of the month for women.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Time of the month is very, very important. That doesn't get enough airtime either.
No.
I think, during that luteal phase, you're going to find that you're going to have more spikes regardless. And I think also the impact of emotions whilst eating can certainly have an impact on your glucose levels. So that all being said, as long as you're aware of the caveats of not everything is going to be nutritionally influenced, on your glucose levels, I think they can still offer some benefits.
And we also have to say, like, the first time you put on a glucose monitor and you see, oh my gosh, my food is actually impacting my body immediately, that is a huge aha moment.
Yeah.
And it's quite important to have that realization because it changes everything. So, I mean, there's pros and cons, right? And if you're somebody who wants to wear a glucose monitor, and this is not a plug for my work, I'm just saying, get my first book, Glucose Revolution, because it goes in depth into all the different patterns, what you see, what influences your glucose levels, because I just don't want you to put one on and become super overwhelmed and stressed out.
Totally.
So, I mean, and I think people can self-identify with whether tracking something is going to make them feel good or not good.
Yeah.
I also see it in myself when I wear a glucose monitor. Of course, it's motivating, but also sometimes I'm like, you know what? I just don't want to look at what this cookie did to my glucose levels. I'm just going to ignore this and not look at the data because I know it's not good for my glucose. And I use the hacks to minimize the spike. But also, like, I don't want a machine to tell me, whoa, Jesse, you ate a cookie. I'm like, yeah, I know I ate a cookie. It's okay.
In the same way, actually. So I wear an Oura Ring, and I've been wearing one for about 5 years. And like, full disclosure, they gifted it to me, and I love it for a number of reasons, because it helps me dictate the type and the intensity of workout that I'm going to be doing in the mornings. I tend to work out every day, and I want to know that I'm well rested enough that if I'm going to do this like long endurance bike ride, it's going to be to the benefit of me rather than at the detriment, because I haven't rested and recovered properly, right? But if I know I'm going out for a friend's wedding, let's say, and I'm going to be up until 2 a.m, I take this thing off because I don't want to know the impact on my sleep the following day. I'm not going to exercise the day afterwards. I know my sleep's going to be terrible. I also don't wear this when I'm on a flight either, because I know exactly what's going to happen as well if it's like, a red-eye flight. So I think there's the same sort of degree of intuition and engineering that we can have around CGM use. You need to be a lot more sort of like responsible for how you use it yourself and understand the pitfalls.
Do you ever have the situation where you wake up and you wore the Oura Ring and you feel good, and then you look at your data and it's like, you had a terrible sleep, and then your entire energy and emotion change. You're like, oh, I guess I feel awful after all. Does that happen?
Yeah. That has happened to me, actually, where I've woken up and I'm like, I didn't feel too bad. And actually my data says something otherwise. Yeah. And then I override my intuition because and I'm getting much better at just leaning more into my intuition, how I feel, how my body is. Am I feeling relaxed? Do I have any aches and pains? Do I want to do something a lot more intense than what my Oura Ring would otherwise dictate to me? I'm going to have the overall sort of decision on that. So again, it really depends on what kind of person you are, what kind of character.
And you can get a lot of the benefits without wearing one.
Yeah, totally.
And then I think another important point is we don't want people to over-index and only focus on glucose. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you had understood that the objective was to keep a really flat glucose curve, and that became your single focus. Well, a lot of things can actually go wrong, because if you add a lot of butter or a lot of processed oils to a meal, that's going to reduce the spike of the meal because the fat is going to slow down starch breakdown. So the spike will be smaller, but it won't be better for you. Another example, if you add alcohol to a meal, the more alcohol, the more you're going to see this effect. It's going to reduce the glucose spike of the meal, because alcohol messes with your liver, which is the control center for your glucose levels. So when you add wine, tequila, vodka, whatever to a meal, the glucose is going to be flatter than without the alcohol.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
And sometimes when you exercise, you will see a big spike, a big glucose spike during exercise. And that's because your muscle is releasing a bunch of glucose into your bloodstream to fuel your body is releasing a bunch of glucose into your bloodstream to fuel your muscles. So if you're focused on your glucose levels, you might think, okay, I need to add a lot of processed oils. I need to add a lot of alcohol and never exercise. So you can see the limitations.
Yeah.
We cannot over-index on this one metric because that's going to be detrimental. There's so many other things that are important.
Totally.
But I like to see glucose as a really good window through which to look at your diet, Because when you study your glucose levels using my hacks, for example, a lot of other things fall into place.
Yeah.
You eat less sugar, you eat more vegetables, you move more. So generally, we are operating in a space of things that most medical professionals would recommend, right? But with the glucose science and the visual aspect of it all, people actually make the first step. And that's what I care about. What I care about is behavior change. How do I encourage people to actually do something?
Yeah.
And if that's through glucose levels and showing you the graph and making it easy, then that's amazing.
Totally.
So I really disagree with medical professionals who are like super cynical. Oh, but glucose doesn't matter, blah, blah. I'm like, who cares? The outcome is that people are eating more vegetables, more protein in the morning, moving more, less addicted to sugar. Like, give me a break. This is great.
And I think the visual aspect is very important there, because in the same way, when I chat to patients, I give them a visual of what a healthy plate looks like. It doesn't necessarily mean that they need to have that visual in front of them every time they sit down to prepare a meal or order something whilst they're out. In the same way, giving them the sort of visuals of glucose and what happens when you sit down to eat a meal or when you eat certain foods doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have that every single time. Like you said right at the start, you don't need to have a CGM every moment of every day to have the same intuition around the types of foods that you should be consuming every single day. And I think context is very, very important here, because I think this is where the cynics kind of come out and like, well, you shouldn't have a glucose-centric way of looking at your diet. That's not what you're, arguing for. It's very, very easy to just be cynical about it. And I think, having a holistic idea of your diet that you talk about in the books is something that is going to be net beneficial to people.
And for every cynical person, there's 100 doctors using my work and my visuals with their patients. So I'm like bring on the cynics. I'm happy to have a conversation, but also we have to make sure that we're not taking so much airtime with the cynicism that we're preventing people who really need this information from making changes. Ultimately, there's 1 billion people in the world today with type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. Kids are eating 85% processed foods in the UK. Like, we need to make a change. We need to help individuals have more information, and we need to, work with the food industry to improve products. So we can talk a little bit about the cynicism. It's fun to debate, but also let's get to work. Let's get people healthier.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think there is a lot more evidence coming around the impact of oscillating glucose levels. Actually having the highs and the lows attenuated. And also
inflammation, heart disease risk, like all of that.
Totally, yeah. And it is coming out like steadily. And perhaps it wasn't there like 4 or 5 years ago, but I think the more people are studying, particularly with the use of CGMs, that I think is pretty profound from a nutritional medicine point of view. The more information will come out about like why studying your glucose level is net a good thing.
And for example, there's a bunch of studies done in people without diabetes showing that the bigger the dip after a spike, the more hungry you're going to be before the next meal, and the more you're going to overconsume food or junk food or whatever's around you. And in my book, I talk about 300 different scientific studies that underpin all this and that show you the correlation between glucose and aging and skin and hormones and brain fog. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming and it makes sense. Blood sugar, and this is not really new. One of the first people to talk about this was Mark Hyman 15 years ago. He wrote the blood sugar solution. So it's been around. People have known about blood sugar for a long time, but it needs to be so common sense now, so commonplace. Just like drink water, brush your teeth, keep your glucose levels steady. That's the goal, really.
Yeah. I always get asked about specific supplements that can steady your glucose levels. Now, I think we've discussed before about these sort of, because particularly after popularizing vinegar, a lot of these like vinegar supplements came out and gummies and all that kind of stuff. And you were like, don't take those. They're full of sugar. And I remember looking at the ingredients, it was like, definitely don't take those because those will not steady your sugar.
And these companies have popped up and have ridden the wave of, glucose is a trendy thing. And there's gummies out there that have 2 grams of sugar per gummy. And they say vinegar gummies. So you think, that's going to be good for me. I'm going to be able to replace the vinegar drink with this. And for the past years, my audience, my readers have asked me, Jessie, what do I do if I don't have vinegar in my purse or I can't have a veggie starter? I'm at a birthday party. My dad doesn't want to do the hacks. Is there a supplement I can take? So I've been researching this very extensively. I found a couple things. I found that most supplements on the market that claim to steady your glucose levels are at best not very effective, and at worst, actually contain sugar and are bad for you. But I also found 4 very interesting plants that have been around forever that recently have been shown by scientists across the world to have a very powerful impact on your glucose levels. And so I got the highest quality ingredients, the highest quality plants, and I actually put them all in a capsule for people to use. And I created this capsule called Anti-Spike. And it is cinnamon, antioxidants from green vegetables, mulberry leaf, and lemon peel extract. 100% vegan and 100% natural. And what this supplement does, and this is supported by 5 years of clinical evidence, 25 clinical trials, it grabs 40% of the sugar from your meal. And instead of letting it go through to your bloodstream to create a big spike, it makes it pass through to your microbiome that feeds on it. So it's good for your microbiome and reduces the spike of whatever you're eating. Now, I know it sounds like a magic pill, and it kind of is, but I don't want people to just take this and not do the food hacks. This is an additional tool in your tool belt for when you need it. But it's really amazing. So short-term impact, reducing glucose, reducing insulin, and long-term, reducing fasting glucose levels and increasing GLP-1, which is the satiety hormone that Ozempic acts on. But Ozempic tricks your brain into thinking there's more GLP-1 in your body. It's a trick. You don't actually have more GLP-1. Anti-Spike actually increases GLP-1 after 6 weeks, so you feel fuller faster. So truly, to me, this is like the ultimate sidekick. If you want one supplement that is the best in the game, this is the one to use.
Okay, so we've established that this is a supplement. So this is an addition to everything that you have in your diet. How before we go into the individual ingredients that sound fascinating, and I haven't come across the mulberry or the lemon peel stuff, so I really want to dive into that. How do you use the supplement? Is it in a similar way to vinegar, like before a meal, or is it like once a day thing?
It's
anytime?
before the meal of your day that's going to be highest in carbs and sugars. You take 2 capsules right before eating, just right before, puff, and that's it. Do that every day to unlock the long-term benefits also of the plants.
Fab. Okay. Cinnamon. So how much cinnamon is in it, and what are the sort of
cinnamon
types?
is actually, interestingly, one of the most studied compounds for improving your glucose levels. And it's been used for millennia. People used to make cinnamon tea, for example. And so I put it in here because it's so robust and it's so, in a sense, old school. It's not the most powerful thing. So we put 85 milligrams in here, but it's supporting you long term. Okay. And cinnamon has been trendy for a while, but it's not the one I'm the most excited about. Because cinnamon, as I said, is old school. The new molecules, the new plants that really are taking center stage and are so exciting is one, the lemon peel extract. Okay. So that's just polyphenols from lemon, and that unlocks the long-term benefit on GLP-1. And the second one, which is really the star of the show, is the white mulberry leaf extract. So, and actually, interestingly, this is completely off topic, but mulberry leaf is what silkworms eat.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, totally off topic. But so mulberry leaf contains a molecule called DNJ. Okay. And so DNJ is now one of my new favorite molecules.
DNJ.
We love her. She's the best. What DNJ does is she tells your little enzymes that break down carbs into glucose to just like chill and work a little bit more slowly. And throughout this podcast, I've explained what you want to do is slow down the breakdown of food. And so DNJ does exactly that. And so what happens is that instead of, let's say, pasta or cookie, by the way, this also works on oat milk, or any carbs, any carbs and sugars. So instead of those carbs breaking down really quickly and going through to your bloodstream, thanks to the mulberry leaf extract, they break down more slowly and more of them pass through to your microbiome instead of being all absorbed into your blood.
Oh, wow. Super interesting. So DNG.
DNJ.
Sorry, DNJ.
It's like DNA. It's like D and Jesse. DNG.
Okay, DNJ.
No, DNJ.
I would trademark that. That's brilliant.
DNJ, yeah.
Okay, so mulberry. I mean, all I think about when I think of mulberries are the sort of ingredients that we use, usually dried mulberries and stuff like that, but mulberry leaf, that's fascinating.
Leaf. And it's not just any mulberry leaf extract. So for each of these molecules that have been proven by all these trials across the world, I source first the actual highest quality, because
Okay.
there's cinnamon extract and
Totally.
cinnamon extract. You know, there's mulberry leaf and mulberry leaf.
Yeah.
So I'm working with the absolute best scientists in the game, and I'm actually really excited to talk about this because it's been 2 years in the making now.
Yeah.
And
Because you didn't mention this the last time we chatted, because it was secret.
It was under wraps, you know, and I'm so proud of this product. I'm just so excited. And yeah, I think it's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry for swearing.
No, it's all right.
It really is. I'm super excited. And I love the idea that some people will be able to give this to their parents or grandparents who don't want to change their diets, but have diabetes, for example. And I'm excited for people to have something in their purse they can take with them. It works on people with diabetes, without diabetes. It works on everybody. So yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
So the
stoked.
lemon peel, that's really interesting. So that's
Yeah.
like a natural Ozempic. Would you?
In a way,
Okay.
if you want, yes. It's better than Ozempic because so GLP-1 is this hormone in your body that tells you I'm full. You know, after you've had like a big meal and and your aunt is like, Rupi,
Yeah.
have some more cake. You're like, no, I'm really full, auntie. I really cannot. That feeling of being stuffed.
Yeah.
One of the reasons you feel that way is because of GLP-1,
Yeah.
the satiety hormone. And Ozempic, what it does is it tricks your brain into thinking there's more GLP-1 in your body. So it tricks your brain into thinking that you're really full. What the lemon peel extract does is it actually tells your microbiome, hey, let's make more GLP-1. GLP-1 is great. It's healthy. And as a result, over 6 weeks, you have a 15% GLP-1 increase in your body. It's not a trick. It is actually happening.
Right.
And that makes me very excited
Yeah.
because, I mean, as you know, the Ozempic craze has been crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to feel fuller,
Yeah.
but Ozempic is just a trick. It's not real. Whereas
Yeah.
this is working with your microbiome to create more of that GLP-1.
That's fascinating. I'm definitely gonna look into that. And the green veg extracts that you, because we're looking into sort of green powders right now, and sort of like trying to decipher what the evidence for the markers. Green powders like everywhere. I
Yep.
mean, Athletic Greens is the OG, and there's loads of questions as to whether people should be eating them, whether they actually have any benefits. There are certain green vegetables that we've come across that certainly have some evidence behind
Yeah.
them, and I think they are good supplements. You know, supplements are a great diet. What are the green veggies that you decided to put in here, or the polyphenols from green
They're
veg?
amazing. Okay, so we have purple carrot, spinach, broccoli, cabbage, asparagus, zucchini, cucumber, and artichoke.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So we have 100 milligrams of these antioxidants.
Uh-huh.
And vegetables have so many great compounds in them, but the antioxidants is one that is quite easy to extract when it's done well. And it gives your body more capacity to fight against whatever crazy stuff you're feeding it and whatever crazy stuff is happening. So more antioxidants is always a good idea. And I wanted to do a veggie antioxidant blend because most people need to eat more vegetables.
Yeah,
So it's a really good complementary molecule to put in anti-spike, so you get some of that value. However, still eat your veggies. Okay, I'm not saying this is replacing veggies.
Totally.
It's an additive thing.
Yeah.
Because one problem I have with a lot of the green powders is that people will have that and then the rest of the day will eat no plants
Totally.
because
yeah.
they're like, oh, I had my veggie powder. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's not the same.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, you talked about the food matrix. You talked about the added benefits of that complement of different compounds that are very hard to extract in their singular form. There's lots of unknowns and probably unknown unknowns about why eating vegetables per se are just so good for you. So like
The
you
matrix is fascinating.
said, yeah.
Did you see I posted recently a graph on Instagram comparing 100 grams of lentils versus 100 grams of lentil pasta, exact same ingredients. So it's like spaghetti made with lentil flour.
They're really popular with gluten-free peeps.
So
and-
exact same nutritional facts,
Yeah.
okay? But the matrix is changed.
completely, yeah.
In the lentils, no spike. In the lentil pasta, big spike. Because it's been blended and the fiber has been pulverized and it's
Yeah.
much faster to be absorbed into your bloodstream.
And so when you did that comparison, is it just plain lentils and plain?
Completely plain. Completely plain. Exact same quantity, exact same molecules, just the
Yeah.
matrix is changed.
That's really interesting because lentils, unlike oats, have got protein.
Yeah.
They've got fiber.
And the
they've got all
lentil
those
pasta
elements.
as well, right?
Yeah,
it's all
yeah,
the
yeah.
same.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just the format that's changed.
Oh wow! So do you recommend people not have lentil pasta anymore, or?
No, I mean, listen, it's still fine. that's why people go with it. I just wanted to show this cool experiment.
I think
Lentil
it's good to
pasta
know.
is still great for you. It's better for you than regular pasta. But also, if you want to eat pasta, just eat regular pasta.
Yeah.
And, you know, have a veggie starter with it. You know,
Yeah,
I'm kind of
yeah.
on the side of just eat the stuff you like and add some hacks so it reduces the impact.
Totally.
But I think it's cool to show that the whole version of the food is always going to be better.
I think these are really interesting, you know, and I think I'm constantly questioning myself because we did a podcast on the food matrix and juicing and smoothies, and my sort of heuristic or rule of thumb is, you know, go for a smoothie rather than a juice. With the juice, you're going to have like refining of the fiber and stuff. You're not going to have that sort of impact of slowing the digestion of sugars because it doesn't coat your intestines, etc., etc. They did a small study where they compared the impact of juicing and a juiced fruit and smoothied fruit, and they measured their glucose levels, and they found the exact opposite.
Did they measure insulin?
No, they didn't mention insulin. No, they
because
just
a
looked at
fruit
glucose.
Juice really triggers high insulin release.
Yes,
Therefore,
yeah,
it can
yeah.
reduce the spike with a negative consequence. Because you can
Yes.
reduce the spike of a food by increasing insulin levels.
Yes.
But that's not good. So you have to measure both.
And they were also in healthy individuals. So you would anticipate a healthy insulin response to
Yeah.
the same food.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone's insulin response is overwhelmed or impaired
Totally.
because of pathology, then yeah. So and one of the other explanations were the absorption of different polyphenols in the fruit that could be
yeah.
mimicking the
Yeah.
sort of glucose flattening impact as well. So we're always sort of questioning things, and I think it's really important to understand the impact of the food matrix, even though we might not understand it completely at the moment. Yeah, this has been fascinating. I wanted to
Thank
ask
you,
you, like,
Rupi.
you know,
Yeah.
you've impacted so many people. What is the most valuable thing that you're getting from the work that you're doing right now?
Oh, interesting. I mean, purpose.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's hard. You know, it looks all rosy on Instagram and
Yeah.
stuff, but it's hard. I'm running a small team. You know, we're trying to make stuff. I have a big audience. I'm very careful. I understand, you know, the power that I have now with this big of an audience. So it's difficult, and I try my absolute best so that everything I make is top quality. You know, in this book, every single sentence, padding on the boxes on a page, photograph, like recipe, quantity, I'm in there. I'm making every single thing. You know, Anti-Spike has been 2 years of complete and utter focus of creating a physical product. The amount of regulation, testing that has to go into this. I mean, you cannot even imagine the logistical situation. This is launching globally at the same time. It's just like, it's huge projects. So it's hard, but I love it.
Yeah.
And it's purpose. You know, when I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a difficult day. I have to do all these things. But also I'm like, you know what? I would take this every time over my previous job, which was great, but didn't really fulfill me in the same way.
Yeah. And that lends a question that, you know, you're teaching us about how to keep our glucose level steady. How do you keep yourself steady and grounded, you know?
Like mentally?
Yeah.
I sleep a lot. I don't drink alcohol. I work out almost every day. I have a solid crew, you know, family, friends that I can count on. I cry a lot. Crying for me is a really good way to regulate my nervous system. I have very easy access to crying. So when I feel stressed or overwhelmed, I'll just cry for 10 minutes and then I feel so much better. I write a lot. It helps me. I have an amazing therapist. All the boring things.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have like a magic solution. And
Yeah.
then if something is really hard, I'm just like, you know, today was a really hard day. And I sort of let it move through me. I don't want to store any of the stress. I try to move it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So I think I have good emotional hygiene.
Yeah.
I'm always like, you know, if something is hard, I'll call up a friend. I'm like, today was really hard. Can I just vent for 10 minutes? They're like, yeah, sure, babe. So I just vent and like, blah, 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 blah. And that helps, you know, processing, moving.
Definitely. Yeah. What do you eat in the day?
What would you like to know?
I would love to know.
What do I eat in a day? Especially when I'm traveling and busy right now, the first place I start, which is a total non-negotiable for me, is a savory breakfast.
Okay, yeah.
So this morning I had an omelette with feta and tomatoes. Super simple. Even at any hotel, they can make something like this for you. And this really sets me up for the whole day so that my glucose levels are nice and steady. Then lunch is very variable. It depends. Sometimes I'm not even hungry until 2 or 3 p.m. because I had such a satiating breakfast. But I'll grab like a salad or a little sandwich or something for lunch. I don't usually have a lot of time, so I grab whatever's around me. And then afternoon, inevitably in the afternoon, I'm like, I could do with a little cookie right now. So inevitably in the afternoon, I'm going to find something little chocolatey to have. And I always have a vinegar drink before that to reduce the spike of the food. And then after I eat the little afternoon snack that I love, I try to go for a 10-minute walk or use my muscles to do something so that I soak up the glucose from that snack. And then dinner is when I have a bit more time. So at dinner, I will always start with a veggie starter. And generally if I'm at home, I'll have some batch cooked veggies in my fridge. So preparing the veggie starter will be very easy, very quick. And that way you harness the power of fiber from the veggies to keep your glucose level steady. And for the rest of the meal, I'll have like some protein and some carbs at the end. But that's generally how my day goes.
Great. Well, you've basically gone through the major hacks in your
Yeah.
books, and you are literally living the
Oh, yeah.
glucose way. Let's go into a bit more detail into those hacks. You mentioned the veggies and how the increased fiber blunts the glucose spike that you have after having a main meal. Talk us through a bit more about the mechanism behind that and perhaps some of the studies that are evidence.
Yeah, the first study that I'll mention, which is very interesting, it showed that you can eat the exact same meal, so the same ingredients, the same quantity, the exact same meal, but if you eat the elements of the meal in a specific order, you can reduce the glucose spike by up to 75%.
Right.
Not changing how much you're eating or what you're eating, just how you're eating it. And the correct order for your glucose levels was shown to be veggies first, then proteins and fats, and then carbs and sugars. So let's say you're faced with a meal which has, I don't know, broccoli, salmon, avocado, and rice, and then chocolate.
And chocolate. I
And then
love
some
that.
chocolate. The correct order for your glucose level is going to be to have the broccoli first, then the salmon and the avocado, then the rice and the dessert. So that study made it very intriguing for me to try to understand what was going on. Why the veggies first? Why is that so powerful? And it's because veggies contain one of my favorite substances, fiber. And for me, fiber, she's just such a badass superwoman. I'm obsessed with her. So fiber is found in great quantities in veggies. And when you eat this fiber at the beginning of the meal, that's really important. At the beginning of the meal, it has time to coat your upper intestine with a protective, gooey shield. And it stays in place in your gut lining for a few hours. And that protective shield then prevents any glucose molecules coming down from, let's say, pasta, rice, cookies, etc. afterwards. It prevents those glucose molecules from passing too quickly into your bloodstream. So you can still eat the carbs that you love, but with less impact on your glucose levels.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, like we've talked about having more fruits and vegetables in the diet per se, but I think this sort of nutrient sequencing, as it's referred to in papers, is just absolutely fascinating. And it's a really easy strategy to ensure that you're not having those big ups and down swings that can lead to cravings and lead to the hypo sort of.
And the thing is, like, so in these studies, you have this sort of theoretical, very strict order, right? You have like veggies, then proteins and fats, then carbs and sugars. You don't need to do something that hardcore in real life. The one thing that I want you to remember, though, is that the veggies first, that's where you're going to harness most of the power.
Yeah.
So don't worry about separating out proteins and fats and blah, blah, blah. Just focus on veggies first.
Yeah.
And you're going to get such a big impact on your health.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you come across anything other than vegetables first that could yield the same results in terms of glucose balancing?
I mean, yes, because all my hacks are quite powerful in their own way. So, for example, switching from a sweet to a savory breakfast, that has a massive impact on your glucose levels because you could be going from a big glucose spike to virtually no spike at all. So in that sense, if you make such a big change, the impact will be even bigger. But veggies first is really easy and powerful. Then there was this whole thing about vinegar.
Yeah.
Vinegar is another interesting one. People love it because it feels a bit like a magic bullet. But I want to remind everybody, it's just one tool in your toolbox.
Yeah.
And the studies show that 1 tablespoon of vinegar in a big glass of water, so it's, a big glass of water like the one I have in front of me here, that can reduce the spike of your meal by up to 30%, right? And you have that. Then you have moving after eating, which also has a tremendous impact on your glucose levels. But if I were to sequence the hacks in order of most important, most powerful, I would always start with the breakfast, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's talk a bit about, because you mentioned vinegar. Let's talk a little bit about the science behind why vinegar can help with glucose. Because I remember we said this on a previous podcast. You have this incredible knack of distilling quite complex scientific concepts into something that everyone can understand, which explains why, the glucose method has absolutely exploded. So perhaps we could talk a bit more about the vinegar and why vinegar can have this drastic impact on blood glucose.
For sure. And it's interesting because most of us have vinegar in our kitchen.
Yeah, totally.
And we don't realize
Yeah.
we have this incredible ingredient. So vinegar contains another one of my favorite molecules called acetic acid. Acetic acid is pretty awesome. So acetic acid slows down how quickly food breaks down into glucose molecules when you digest it. So it's there, it's working its little magic. So as a result, if you have some vinegar and then you have, let's say, some pasta, the pasta will turn into glucose molecules more slowly. And that's really the key, Rupi, because what we want to do is we want to reduce how quickly glucose arrives into our bloodstream. We want to sort of taper the velocity, so that, yes, we get a glucose rise, but it's not a crazy Himalaya rise. It's more like a rolling, Swiss mountains. That's what you want. You want to get glucose arriving in your bloodstream at a slower pace so that you don't get the crazy ups and downs. So that's vinegar. It's acetic acid. It's very straightforward. So 1 tablespoon, big glass of water before eating, and it's quite powerful. You can do it once a day. That's what I recommend. A lot of people ask me, what about lemon? Does that work? So lemon contains citric acid, and that's a different molecule. It doesn't work as well as vinegar, but it's still powerful if you are not a big vinegar fan. And then what you can do actually is make a vinegar dressing and put it on your veggie starter.
Yeah.
So you can combine them, but that's why, I'm French, and in France we have this tradition of starting the meal with a salad and a vinaigrette, so a vinegar dressing. And as I was learning the science, I was like, God damn, like all this stuff has been known forever, actually. This is not groundbreaking stuff, but we've lost touch with so many of these cultural habits that are actually super good for us. I mean, you see this all the time, right? We have to go back to how we were eating.
Totally, yeah. I mean, when we were talking about fiber and probiotics and vinegar, the first thing I think about is pickles and traditional ferments and stuff that we generally start a meal with. And if you look at the sort of pattern of different cultural ways of eating, in Indian food, we have, different sort of mango and lime pickles. In washaku, which is that sort of traditional way of eating Japanese food, you start off with a ferment. In Italian, so my wife's Italian, there's antipasti. There's all these different sort of, it's sort of like embedded in the code of like how our ancestors ate, which is why I find it so fascinating, where science sort of adds another lens as to explain why.
We explain why with the science, so we can go back to those. And same with the breakfast, right? The invention of sweet breakfast food, essentially dessert first thing in the morning, that is a total invention of the food industry.
Totally.
This was not, we did not used to do this. We used to have, breakfast was a normal meal.
Yeah.
It was not like, in the morning we eat, dessert. And
Sugar.
then when you think about it, but it's become so commonplace. And we all think it's normal to have cereal and orange juice in the morning, when actually it makes no sense. And it's really an invention for profit of the food industry.
Yeah.
So,
there was this really interesting article actually that was done by, I think it was The Guardian and the New York Times. And a photographer went and sort of photographed what kids eat around the world.
Really?
Yeah, and they went to sort of US, they went to obviously England, but India, Sri Lanka, Japan, Korea, and they just had wildly different starts of the day. And you could tell like which one was healthier. And if you sort of do a little bit more homework and map where the obesity issues are, whilst it is definitely growing in nations like India and Southeast Asia, it's nowhere near as bad as it is in the US. And you can just see the patterns of eating for kids at the start of the day offers some sort of like suggestion as to what is going on at a population level. So I find that fascinating. I think we sort of need to return to that traditional way of eating.
Exactly. And I grew up, in France, and every morning for breakfast, I had a Nutella crepe with orange juice.
Oh, wow.
And my mom would have Special K
Yeah.
with an orange juice. And then I remember so vividly, she would grab the pot of sugar and then sprinkle like 3 tablespoons of white sugar onto the bowl of Special K.
Yeah.
And now when I think back, I'm like, no wonder I was so hungry by 10 a.m. in class. No wonder I felt exhausted.
Yeah.
No wonder I woke up always with this pain in my stomach, like I'm so hungry. You know,
Yeah.
I was on the glucose roller coaster my entire childhood.
Absolutely, yeah.
And now my favorite breakfast is just to have dinner leftovers and crack an egg in the pan.
That's
with it.
literally what I had this morning. I literally
good.
had like, so when because I got back from Australia yesterday, I'm doing all right.
You're doing
I'm
fantastic.
doing okay.
Yeah, I'm very impressed.
I had a good sleep last night, but one of the most comforting meals that I like is something quite traditional. So it's chickpeas, lentils, a whole bunch of veggies, and it has some coconut milk and loads of different spices. And I literally had that for this morning with an egg cracked into it as well.
Perfect.
So like for me, that's like a great start of the day, leftovers.
Perfect.
But people sort of have this aversion, I think, particularly in the UK, to having something savory or leftover from dinner for breakfast.
But that's kind of like level 2.
Yeah.
I think level 1 is going from sweet to savory and seeing how much better you feel and how the days when you have a savory breakfast, you can actually take things off your to-do list.
Yeah.
And you feel amazing in your
Yeah.
clothes and you feel energized. And then you're like, this thing is interesting. And then level 2 is when people start having leftovers for breakfast.
Yeah.
I even get messages from people who say that now they eat anchovies at breakfast. And
Oh,
I'm very
yeah.
proud.
Very
Yeah.
proud. Yeah.
But that's level 2, guys. Just chill out. Just first savory breakfast. And in my book, I even have recipes that are sort of savory takes on traditional sweet breakfasts.
Yeah.
So I have a savory jam on toast,
Ah.
which is roasted peppers and feta on a sourdough piece. I have nut granola.
Yeah.
So no spike granola. And lots of these kinds of
Yeah.
first steps into the savory world.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I think this is probably level 2 as well. But you've also got a savory smoothie, which I've started doing a
Yes.
lot more of actually, because I used the CGM a few months ago. I do it intermittently just to
Yeah.
sort of like see how I'm responding, what kind of like, insights I can gather. And I had a smoothie with, I used to have it with oat milk, which unbeknownst to me, shot my sugar right up.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a corresponding crash, and I would feel almost like trembly after like my smoothie. And obviously it was just my glucose roller coaster. And I didn't really have the intuitive sort of sense to question the type of milk that I was putting into my smoothie. So now when I do have a smoothie, which is, not particularly often, I do a savory one like you have actually in the book. So it's like almond butter,
protein
I think
powder.
it's protein powder.
And
yeah.
I call it savory, but actually there's fruit in there.
Yeah, of course.
It's just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's not a real savory smoothie,
Yeah.
but it's a smoothie that keeps your glucose levels steady because
Yeah.
it has protein in it
Yeah.
and fat and not too much sugar. On the topic of oat milk, I think people need to understand that the way oat milk is made is that it's just taking oats and pulverizing them into this juice. It's making oat juice. And similarly, you could make pasta milk. If you cooked pasta, blended it with a bunch of water until it was completely liquid, that would be pasta milk. And when you're having oat milk, it's just liquid starch, right? It's just thousands and millions of little tiny glucose molecules just running around in this raw water and creating a big glucose spike in your body. Because when you make milk from a starch, it's just starch juice. But if you make milk from, for example, almonds, coconuts, or nuts or pistachios,
Yeah.
because nuts contain protein and fat, you're going to get a milk that is much steadier for your
Yeah.
glucose levels.
Yeah.
But I just went back to whole milk,
Yeah.
whole cow's milk. Great source of protein. I'm not intolerant. I do great on it. So yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot more people are probably moving back toward that as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
And for those who have intolerances, there are like 3 ingredient milks out there that I think are great, and they won't spike your sugar. They won't lead to that roller coaster. And it's certainly something that I'm doing more of these days when I have a smoothie. Last one, let's talk about movement, because I think
Yeah.
this one is super, super easy to do. And there are sort of like Ayurvedic sayings, and there are a whole bunch of sort of traditions, in like moving after eating that I think are something that we've lost, and you're bringing back to the surface
Again, it's so traditional and it's not groundbreaking, but now we understand the science behind it. So why moving after eating? Well, first you have to understand that glucose is your body's favorite source of energy. And every single cell, muscle in your body uses glucose for energy. So for example, anybody listening, make a fist with your right hand right now and really squeeze it. As you're doing this, the muscles in your hand are using glucose to be able to contract. And so we can use this to our advantage. If after a meal, we contract our muscles for 10 minutes, some of the glucose from that meal is going to be used and burned by your muscles for energy instead of hanging around and creating a big glucose spike. And when people hear movements and contracting muscles, they're often like, oh God, I don't want to go to the gym. Like, what is this intense thing going to be? It actually doesn't have to be intense at all. It can just be 10 minutes of walking. Just grab a colleague, grab a friend, go for a 10-minute walk after your meal. It can be cleaning your apartment. It's become a thing for me because I'm quite a messy person. So I'm like, well, I just ate, so I have to clean my apartment for 10 minutes. So you make a little deal with yourself like that. It can be playing with your dog. It can be picking up your kids. It can be dancing to a few of your favorite songs. It can be if you're sitting at your desk, you can just put your feet on the ground and then do some calf raises. Nobody will even notice. You can do it during a meeting. You're like, I'm burning glucose molecules right now. And this is quite powerful because your calf contains the soleus muscle, which is very good at soaking up glucose from the bloodstream. So that's the fourth hack I recommend in my method. 10 minutes of movement after one meal a day. Make it super simple, easy. Get a friend to do it with you. And that's going to help your glucose levels a lot.
Yeah. And you've done some research with your community based on this, right? I want to dive into that because that was something that I don't think we got to chat about last time. And we were doing a bit of work over the summer and you were telling me about it and it just sounded so impressive. So let's talk about some of those numbers because they are brilliant.
Well, so for the second book, because I'm a scientist, I was like, it'd be so cool to get some data. Now, if there are any scientists listening, I did not run a placebo-controlled randomized trial. Was just an experiment. Yeah. So what I did is I recruited people off my Instagram to test out my 4-week method before the book even came out. So I gave them all the instructions, all the recipes, and at the end of each week, they would send me the answers to a questionnaire, and I would just ask them how they're doing. So they just added 4 hacks into their life: savory breakfast, vinegar, veggie starter, and movement. And importantly, the rest of the time, they ate and drank whatever they wanted.
Whatever they want.
Yeah, so we're just adding things in. When I'm not controlling anything else about your life, I'm just add these hacks in and see how you feel. So the results were amazing. Let me read you the stats. So after 4 weeks of the glucose goddess method, we have 90% of people were less hungry. 89% of people reduced their cravings. 77% of people had more energy. 67% of people said they were happier, which I think is so important. Mental health, how you feel about yourself. Then we have amazing stats on sleep, on mental health, on skin. 41% of people with diabetes improved their diabetes in these 4 weeks. 35% of people with hormonal issues also improved them in these 4 weeks. And so note on weight loss. What I propose is not a diet, right? The objective is not weight loss. But however, when you study your glucose levels, you're doing three things. You're reducing cravings, reducing hunger, and increasing fat burning. So naturally, a lot of people lose weight without even trying. And so in this experiment, 38% of people in these 4 weeks lost weight, lost fat on their body, which is something that a lot of people are looking for, without counting calories, without cutting out foods, just by adding these 4 hacks in.
Yeah. That's super impressive. And I wanted to dive in to cravings because cravings, I think, is something that you're paying a bit more attention to. Why don't we actually discuss what a craving is potentially caused by? Because I guess the scientific definition of a craving is like an intense desire for a particular type of food. What it, in certain circumstances, may be the reasons behind somebody has a craving.
So I'll mention my favorite study of all time, which was done in the US at Stanford. So researchers recruited participants and put them in an fMRI scanner. You know those scanners where you can see the brain activity? And while the participants were in the scanner, the researchers were showing them on a screen in front of their faces images of foods. So like broccoli, burger, salad, cookie. And they asked the participants to rate how much they wanted to eat the food. So imagine you're in the fMRI scanner and you see a photo of a cookie. You have to say 1 to 10 how much you want to eat it right now. But that's not all. The researchers also were measuring the participants' glucose levels in real time. And this is what they found. They found that when people's glucose levels were steady, they didn't rate any of the foods very highly. It was like broccoli, 5, cookie, 5, burger, 5. But when the people's glucose levels were dropping and were low, all of a sudden, they were rating the sort of junk food items really high. They were like cookie 10, burger 11, you know? And what the researchers found was that as the participants' glucose levels were low, there was a part of their brain that was activating. And that part is the part that is in charge of cravings.
Right.
So the craving center of their brain was going like beep, 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 and causing this desire for these junk food items.
Yeah.
So what did we learn from this? We learned that cravings can come from having dropping or low glucose levels. And when do we have low glucose levels? After a spike.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's say you're having a breakfast that is just carbs. So let's imagine a fruit smoothie, an oat milk cappuccino, and some toast and jam. Okay? That's going to send your glucose levels on a big spike and then a drop 90 minutes later. And that drop is going to activate your craving center. And then you're going to be looking for a cookie or a chocolate bar.
Yeah.
And that urge is not something that you can control because you're fighting against an evolutionary reaction in your brain.
Yeah.
And so when you have a craving, you cannot suppress it. You cannot just apply willpower to it. It's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
It comes from within your biology. So if you're somebody who relates to this, understand that often your cravings can be caused by what you had at your previous meal. So if you study your glucose levels, the spikes are going to be less pronounced, the dips will be less pronounced, and then you'll have fewer cravings.
Yeah. Putting this into a practical context, I remember when I became a junior doctor, this is like 15, 16 years ago now, and I would start my day with cereal, you know, something quick to eat as I rushed out the door, a quote unquote normal breakfast.
Yeah.
And then around 10 or 11 a.m., like after the ward round and stuff, I would have this intense desire to just eat anything. And usually in that environment, there are some cookies or like Haribo, jelly, sweets, whatever at the nurse's station that I just quickly grab as I carry on with my day. And I think most people can recognize a similar food environment, a similar context where they have that same sort of intense craving and that desire, with the opportunity of having something that's quite refined and sugar laden. And so part of why I think I'm on the fence, or not on the fence, I'm more bullish around this idea of controlling glucose, is because it does have a significant impact on the practical implications on a day-to-day basis of like how people interact with food.
Yeah. And how are your cravings now?
Oh, my cravings are great.
Yeah.
My cravings are great because I have protein in the morning. I have much less refined sugars. I'm much more aware of like spikes and stuff as I've lent more into nutrition and nutritional medicine. And I don't really have that desire to have like that. Also, I think part of it, Jessie, is my palate has changed significantly over the last couple of years, that I've lent more into the bitter flavors of food and the spices and everything else. And actually, if I eat, you know, something that is really, really refined, I have almost like an aversion to it. That doesn't mean that I don't have a sweet tooth. I like literally just, as I was saying, I got back from Australia and like, I have, I had Lamington. Do you know what a Lamington is?
No.
Oh my gosh. It's like this sponge cake that is covered in chocolate and it has a layer of jam in it and it has coconut flakes on top.
Like the little cookies, but in cake form.
Yeah, basically similar to that. But oh my gosh, it's like amazing. It's like in a square form and stuff. And it has this like bounce to it. And it's like a real sort of Aussie, you know, sweet thing. And obviously I'm going to have that. And obviously I'm going to like enjoy, you know, brunch in the mornings and all those like sugar laden stuff. But I don't have that sort of intense craving on it every single day. That's the difference.
That's the difference, right? Going from a space where you feel controlled by a desire to eat anything sweet around you to a space where you just are in pleasure mode. You're like, oh, you know what? Tomorrow I'm going to go back to that bakery because I have a meeting at this place. I'm going to get my favorite cookie. And you feel excited and happy about it. You don't feel like, oh my God, like give me a chocolate bar. It's a very different experience of the sugar and of the food.
Totally.
And that's such a nicer way to experience sugar when it comes from joy and not, you know, shame and guilt and feeling controlled by the urge.
Totally. What was your relationship with food when you were growing up and as a young woman and how did that lead to where you are today?
Well, when I was a kid, we didn't know much about food in my family. So I had a Nutella crepe every morning for breakfast.
Right.
My mom had orange juice, Special K with a bunch of sugar on it every morning. And then what happened is that my mother met my stepdad, and he had a brother called David Servan-Schreiber, who was one of the leading French doctors who started educating people on the importance of food for health. And back then, I mean, nobody believed that the food you ate could have any impact on your health. So it was quite groundbreaking. But thanks to him, we discovered this whole world, sugar, processed foods versus whole foods, fiber, omega-3s. It was really a revelation. So as a teenager, I started discovering this world, and I really had an affinity for it. I thought it was very interesting. And then what really cemented my interest in health and the body was this freak accident I had when I was 19. And you mentioned you read my book, and in it, there's an X-ray of the hardware I now have in my spine from that accident. It was really terrible. I mean, physically and mentally, I suffered a lot, but it taught me at that young age that nothing is more important than health. And so I went on this quest, this journey to try to figure out, how do I feel good? Because I felt like absolute crap every single day.
Yeah.
And over the years, it led me to glucose. And now here I am. I feel great that I share the science with other people so they can feel good too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tell me about the accident. Obviously, I know about it, but the listeners, what exactly happened to you?
So I was on vacation with some friends in Hawaii, and they were like, "Hey, let's go jump off this waterfall." So I was like, "Okay, cool." So I jump off of the waterfall, and instead of landing with my feet first, I kind of land sitting down. So one of my vertebrae exploded under the pressure just by hitting the water. And so I was walking around with this broken spine. So I had to have surgery where they went in, took the broken vertebrae out, fused it with the top and the bottom ones. And I was in a lot of pain for a very long time. But then physically, I actually recovered really well because I was 19, So when you're that age, your body can heal quite quickly. So in a matter of months, I was totally fine physically. But mentally, all the stress from the surgery, from the accident, the unprocessed trauma, I think, led to this really intense mental health condition called well, it has a few names, but depersonalization is the clinical name they gave me for the condition, which is just like very deep anxiety about existing. Depression, brain fog, dissociation, impossible to be alone because I was so scared of just being. And that's what started me on this journey to try to understand my body. And that's why I went on to study biochemistry in grad school. Then I worked in genetics because I really wanted to figure out, how do I heal? It was my number one priority in life.
Yeah. And so you did biochemistry first, and then you did math. Is that right? Was that part of your master's?
Math was before. So when I broke my back, I was in my second year of undergrad studying math in London.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. And so after that, you went to work at a very famous genomics company.
Yes.
What was that experience like?
23andMe. Oh, it was incredible. So I wanted to work in the field of genetics because I thought, if I can understand my DNA, then I can understand my body and I can figure out how to feel good. The experience was amazing. I mean, the best company, the best people, I had the best job. It was really one of the happiest times of my life, but it did not help me figure out how to feel good, because while your genetics are interesting, they can't tell you what you need to do to wake up in the morning feeling good. And that was a difficult realization I had while I was there.
Yeah. And one of the things that you got experience of was the continuous glucose monitor. That was one of you put yourself up for being one of the guinea pigs. And you very casually mentioned this in the book, but you built your own app to better visualize what was going on with your continuous glucose measurements. And as someone who's just finished completing building their app, I know that it's no mean feat to build an app. So, and you did this, did you do that on your own? Was that something you just spun up?
So let me tell you the backstory. So while I was at 23andMe, there was this opportunity to try, as you mentioned, these devices, continuous glucose monitors, that you need a prescription for in the US. And so I put one on and it completely changed my life forever, because finally I was able to see the inside of my body and
Mm,
communicate with my biology in a way that I had been completely incapable of before. And so I learned about glucose, and I saw that glucose spikes were bad, that we had to keep our glucose levels steady. And then I wanted to share the science that I had learned with my friends and my family. I was like, guys, look, like this study shows us that if we have vinegar before our meals, we can avoid glucose spikes and feel better. But my friends didn't react to me just printing the studies and showing them the printed pieces of paper. Like
yeah.
nobody really connects to that. So I thought, how am I going to communicate this important information? So I had this idea of taking data from my glucose monitor and turning it into these graphs that I could show people to illustrate the science. But the problem is the app that the device comes with, it's a medical app. Like it's not something you can just turn into easy to understand graphics. It's just
Yeah.
raw data and nothing else. So I had to figure out how to extract the data from that app and then to make my own little illustrations. So yeah, I built a piece of software that did it. I took lots of different pieces from the internet. So the concept was I had to take a screenshot of my daily glucose curve on the app that the device came with.
Uh-huh.
And then I would put this image through a digitizer online that would like
Uh-huh.
extract the data points. And then I wrote this software in this program called R, which I had learned when I was in grad school.
Right.
And this program then took the data and made these graphs. And the evolution of that is what you see on my Instagram today. And so
Yeah.
then I worked with some engineers to like make it into a proper app. But at the beginning, it was running just on my laptop for, a year.
Yeah.
I was just importing my data and running it really startup mode, really like Silicon Valley vibes
Yeah.
from my living room. So yeah, I did do that.
That's fab. That I've so much respect for that, because I know how difficult it is, to do this on your own as well. And the fact that you're able to spin it up and by yourself is amazing. So, and it's a
Well,
really cool app.
thank you. And when you really want to do something,
Mm,
personally, if I really want something to happen, like nothing can get in my way, I will make it happen. And so I spent countless hours building this piece of software um, to make it work. But I was so determined to doing this because I knew this would change the game. I knew this would help people visualize the science, understand it, become interested in it. And that was my objective, because the stuff
yeah.
I had discovered was so life-changing. I needed to find a way to make it sexy so I could share it and people could then apply it to their own lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's dive into that. So why is sugar so important? Maybe we could talk about the different names, the relationship between starch, sugars, and fiber. And yeah, what would just give us a primer on that?
Sure. So the word I use is glucose. And as you know, glucose is your body's preferred energy source. And we get glucose from the foods we eat. So every time we eat something starchy, like bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, or every time we eat something sweet. So this could be fruit, this could be cookies, this could be cakes, whatever. Every time you eat something starchy or sweet, they break down into glucose in your body. Special mention for the sweet foods also break down to fructose. That's a separate issue. But if you eat something sweet or starchy, glucose is going to land in your bloodstream. And glucose is very important. Like we need it to be able to function properly. But the problem arises when we deliver too much glucose too quickly to our body. It's like if you give a plant too much water and it drowns, or a human too much oxygen and they pass out. Too much glucose creates these glucose spikes, and these glucose spikes have lots of consequences.
Yeah, you're really good at creating analogies, just like you just did
Thank
there
you.
with the plant, for example, because I think it's really important to communicate that it's not glucose per se or sugars per se that the issue, it's the excess of them, as well as what you describe in the book as the velocity and the spiking of them and the degree of change as well. Because, as people who listening to this podcast will likely understand, glucose is an essential molecule for life. It's how we provide energy to our cells, whether it be brain cells, liver cells, etc. So with that in mind, let's talk about what those ranges should be for glucose, and why a CGM or knowledge about your sugar levels would help with maintaining those sugar amounts.
Absolutely. And you might be able to help me because I know the units in milligrams really well. I'll try to remember the ones in millimole, which are the British units.
Yeah.
So you're going to help me. So fasting, which means first thing in the morning, level of glucose should, per the NHS, be underneath 100 milligrams per deciliter, which I believe is 5.5 millimoles. Is that correct?
It's about 5.5 millimoles per
5.5
liter.
millimoles. Anything above that, as you're fasting, so first thing in the morning level, signals prediabetes and then diabetes, which is a big issue. However, while these are the numbers the NHS publicly, recommends, the fact that if your blood glucose level first thing in the morning is under 5.5 millimoles might mean that you're normal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your blood sugar levels are optimal. So the science shows us that actually it's probably ideal for your body to have fasting glucose levels under 4.5 millimoles or 85 milligrams per deciliter. So that's just fasting. And then we also know that after a meal, when the concentration of glucose level is most likely to increase most rapidly, because it's after eating that glucose gets into the bloodstream, we have to think about the spike that the meal creates. And from the studies, it appears that it is ideal to try to keep that spike to under 1.7 millimole per liters after eating. And again, this is from early studies done in non-diabetics. So in my work, in my book and on Instagram, I define a spike as anything above 1.7 millimole per liter increase after a meal. And the objective is to try to avoid these spikes because they have all these consequences on our physical and mental health.
Yeah. I think this speaks to a wider issue that we have in medicine with regards to reference ranges and how we actually come up with reference ranges. We usually look at the average and then 2 standard deviations either side. And that's why we have pretty large ones for things like liver function tests, for example, where it doesn't demonstrate optimal values. It just demonstrates what they should be to be quote unquote normal. And so I guess what you and the book is getting at is, okay, what is an optimal level of glucose that we should try and aim for to prevent any of these issues, rather than something that just signals when something is going wrong? Because a lot of the times, particularly during my experience as a medic, is we catch people too late. We catch people in that pre-diabetes stage or even type 2 diabetes stage as per an OGTT and or a glucose tolerance test, rather than getting it before then, where we have a lot more time to make some changes to ensure that it's reversible. And I think, we have to really look into that rather than the arbitrary amounts that we currently have within the NHS and other healthcare systems.
Yeah, because right now, if you go to the doctor and your fasting is 5.3, they'll say, oh, it's normal, it's not pre-diabetic, you can go home. When actually, if you're at 5.3, it means you've probably slowly been inching towards prediabetes for a decade. And actually, you should try to, change a little bit of your lifestyle, use my easy hacks to get that number down. But right now, as you know, doctors are there to diagnose and treat diseases. And so unless you have a prediabetes diagnosis, not much is recommended to you, when really we can all benefit from keeping our glucose levels steady, not just to avoid prediabetes, but to sleep better, to have better mental health, to avoid cravings, to avoid wrinkles, hormonal issues. I mean, it's much wider than just diabetes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a number of personal stories of family members that have just missed that cutoff of HbA1c. And we know about the inaccuracies of HbA1c anyway, because it doesn't catch those glucose spikes, and it's just an average over a month period or a couple of months period. So that again speaks to the potential utility of a CGM and more sort of rigorous understanding and monitoring of glucose.
And what's happened to your family members?
Oh, I mean, they've got me, so I've changed their diet quite a bit, and they are much lower, and their personal docs are quite pleased with how their HbA1c is looking. So yeah,
nice.
But we're trying to make this information as freely available as possible.
Yeah.
So, teaching people about those thriving ranges of glucose is super important. So we've established the reference ranges, why there might be some inherent inaccuracies, and the velocity of glucose and the changes that we might see in your bloodstream. What happens when we see those big changes? Let's say, you have a cinnamon bun. I love cinnamon buns. I know you like your chocolate as well. Yeah. So what happened? Why are these so bad? Why is a glucose spike going to be damaging to a whole bunch of issues within the body?
So the two main things that happen in your body when you spike have to do, one, with your mitochondria, and two, with toasting. So I will explain both. So every time you have this big increase in concentration of your blood sugar levels, so this glucose spike, glucose, when it arrives in your bloodstream, its primary objective is to go to your cells, to go to your mitochondria, so your mitochondria can transform it into energy. And every cell in your body needs these mitochondria to make energy in order to see, for your eye cells, think, for your brain cells, move, for your feet cells so you can dance. Every cell in your body wants this glucose to arrive so it can make energy. Unfortunately, in the case of a spike, too much glucose arrives too quickly to your mitochondria. And your mitochondria do not like this very intense delivery of glucose. They kind of get overwhelmed and they shut down. They go on strike. They're like, no, I can't. I just can't. It's too much. I cannot. And so they just shut down and they stop being able to turn glucose into energy. And as your mitochondria shut down, by the way, poor mitochondria, they produce these molecules called free radicals. And free radicals are these stress molecules that your mitochondria make. Free radicals are really damaging to our body because everything they touch, they hurt. So if a free radical bumps into your DNA, it can cause a mutation in your DNA that might lead to cancer. If a free radical bumps into the membrane of one of your cells, it will cut that membrane open and your cell will get damaged. So your body tries to protect you against these free radicals by increasing inflammation levels. So that's one of the things that happen. Mitochondria get overwhelmed. That leads to free radical production, oxidative stress, and inflammation. First bad thing. Second bad thing has to do with toasting. So this was news to me when I learned about it. From the moment we're born, we're slowly cooking. Like literally, the inside of a human body cooks like a piece of toast in the toaster or a chicken in the oven. And then when you're fully cooked, you die. For real. And this cooking process is called glycation. And literally your insides brown from the moment you're born until you die. With every glucose spike, you cook a little bit faster. Because glucose, when it's running around in your body, when it bumps into another molecule, it glycates it, it cooks it essentially. So with every glucose spike, you're aging faster. And this shows on your face. You get wrinkles quicker, and it also damages your organs, and eventually they shut down and you die. So your body knows these two terrible things are happening. Your mitochondria are suffering and you're cooking too fast. Yeah. So it tries to protect you against this glucose, this excess glucose that is causing these issues. And to protect you, it sends out insulin, the hormone from your pancreas. And insulin takes glucose, as much glucose as it can, and it ushers it away into these storage units. So your muscles, your liver, and your fat cells. And that's one of the ways that we gain weight. And over time, when this happens a lot, your body has to produce more and more insulin to try to prevent too much glucose from floating around. And this then leads to prediabetes and diabetes. So those are the main mechanisms that happen. It's not so rosy.
Yeah, I know. It's almost like we have to talk about these things as tough as it is to talk about the fact that we are all toasting inside, and those glycation products can lead to these issues, whether it's wrinkles, whether it's energy crashes, whether it's issues with our immune system. You can look at this through so many different lenses and how metabolism affects. I mean, immunometabolism is a really big thing. And I think a lot more people are thinking about it, considering what we've gone through and still going through with the pandemic as well, and about how those who have worsening weight issues and obesity have worsening outcomes when it comes to any infection, let alone the
Yeah, I
pandemic.
think in the studies, so if you are pre-diabetic, so if you have fasting glucose levels that are high, you're twice as likely to die from a COVID infection.
Mm,
And more studies have been coming out showing this very clear connection. And this is not, the only space in which having too much glucose for too long or glucose dysregulation causes issues. I mean, also a big one that I hear a lot about in my community is female hormones and
mm,
how too much glucose and too much insulin causes problems like infertility, can be one of the reasons you develop polycystic ovarian syndrome. It really is fundamental. And I have this image that I like using. Imagine your body is a plane
mm.
and you're sitting in the cockpit, and your job is to try to keep your plane flying in the air, to keep your body healthy, essentially. But the problem is you have no idea how the plane works. Like, I used to have no idea how my body worked, yet I was the pilot trying to make myself feel good, trying to keep myself healthy. Well, my whole philosophy is there's one lever in the cockpit that if you learn about it, it's going to give you the biggest bang for its buck. You're going to be able to keep your plane flying and start improving all aspects of your health. And that lever is understanding your glucose levels and
Mm.
avoiding these glucose spikes. And so many things fall into place when we do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love the way you describe insulin, even though it's responsible as an anabolic hormone for putting on weight. We should be thankful for it because it is protecting us against the issues of excess glucose in our bloodstream, causing
Absolutely.
glycation and inflammation and oxidative stress. So I think having that sort of knowledge and that thankful attitude to
Mhm.
what's normal in our body is really important to recognize.
Yeah, because actually, genetically, if you're not able to put on weight, to put on
Mm,
fat, your glucose levels are going to be higher much quicker, and you're going to be more likely to develop diabetes faster than somebody who can put on a lot of fat. So when we gain weight, we have to actually thank our body for for creating this fat to protect us against the development of diabetes too quickly. It's a whole mental shift, but
yeah.
I think it's really important to do. We have to thank our body. Our body is just trying to keep us alive, guys. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
working for us, but we just don't understand its language. So we tend to blame it, or to blame ourselves, or to be confused, or to antagonize it. But actually, everything your body does is to try to help you.
If you want to learn about the worst drinks for longevity, check out this video that I've done here that looks at the popular drinks that are on the market that are actually antithetical to healthy aging.